It was going to be gardening and crafts and singing and just a chance to heal.
So that's what your parents thought the school was going to be?
That's right.
And was that in any way correct?
No. And I knew that the minute the door shut behind me.
Michelle was only 12 and brand new in the house when she says 2 staff women told her to take off her clothes and forced her into a closet where a man would give what Hephzibah House claims is a medical examination.
They held both my legs and both of my arms down and let him do this to me. He stuck a speculum inside of me, and I was scared. I was screaming, and I didn't want him to touch me, and there was nothing I could do.
Solitary confinement, like something out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
But that is what these places do. It's what they're built on, breaking you down in order to rebuild you and mold you as the cult member that they want you to be.
Earlier this year, I released a video on Dr. Phil and some of the issues with his problematic talk show. In that episode, I touched on his connections with the troubled teen industry and a few of the institutions that he supported during his career, including the Provo Canyon School and the Turnabout Ranch in Escalante, Utah. While researching for that video, I came across a mountain of information about the industry, as well as spoke to a few survivors about their experiences, and their stories will forever haunt me. Parentally endorsed kidnappings, sexual, physical, and mental abuse, torture, and forced over-medication. These are just a few of the things I was able to find on my journey into the practices of a brutal and barbaric industry, disguised as a means of helping those most vulnerable to its abuses. On today's episode of Pop Culture and Beyond, I would like to take you on a deep dive into the troubled teen industry, Bad Baby's recent allegations against the Turnabout Ranch, and the Breaking Code Silence movement that is desperately needed and long overdue. It was the year that NASA was created. The year that 14-year-old Bobby Fischer won the United States Chess Championships. And it was also the year that a man named Charles E. Diedrich founded the Synanon Recovery Program in Santa Monica, California. Believe me, this entire thing connects. Just bear with me for a moment, I promise. Hippie culture was just beginning to move into California at this time. But the drug movement of the 1960s hadn't quite started, so programs like Narcotics Anonymous didn't exist yet. And Charles, feeling as though his issues with drug addiction weren't quite the same as those addicted to alcohol, decided to found his own group, Synanon, as the drug addiction recovery group, and for a little while it was actually quite welcome in the community, with members coming from all over the state to seek help as well as comfort. By the early 1960s, the group had moved on from just being a simple recovery group to a full-on commune centered around Diedrich's own form of treatment, a practice that has since been dubbed attack therapy. Attack therapy, as defined by Wikipedia, is a type of psychotherapy that includes a highly confrontational interaction between a patient and a therapist, or between a patient and fellow patients during group therapy, in which the person may be verbally abused, humiliated, and degraded by the group and even their own therapist. Oftentimes, physical violence was used as well, and the entire process was a means in which to break the person so that they could be rebuilt, but better. Those aren't my words. That was what Charles E. Diedrich intended with his particular form of therapy. From there, Charles's LSD addiction and budding alcoholism took hold, and by the 1970s, Synanon had rebranded itself as the Church of Synanon and quickly evolved into one of the most dangerous and violent cults in American history. To sum it all up, to be a member of Synanon, you were required to shave your head, don matching overall-type uniforms, partners were separated and recoupled, men were forced to have vasectomies, and women who were pregnant were forced to obtain abortions, as Diedrich viewed children as a drain on community resources. Any children who were part of the church were raised away from their parents in a separate building dubbed the hatchery.
Our parents were like ghosts in Synanon, haunting us then disappearing again, leaving us to wonder what their connection to us was supposed to mean. What is a mom, and what is a dad, and what is a family? And if it's so special, then why'd you leave me? How long can you live with ghosts before deciding to become one?
Members were required to participate in daily games, which is just another word for attack sessions, and Diedrich had eventually amassed enough support to create his own militia, dubbed the Imperial Marines.
Nobody is going to mess with us. Nobody.
Eventually, the commune was disbanded when multiple members were arrested after trying to kill a prominent lawyer by placing a rattlesnake in his mailbox. I'm not kidding, that really happened, and honestly, as far as assassination attempts go, gotta give him points. That's actually pretty creative. The victim thankfully survived and went on to help take down the group once and for all. But how does this connect to the troubled teen industry? And I told you it did, and here's how. In 1967, two former members of Synanon, Mel and Bridget Wasserman, created the Sea-Doo High School in Running Springs, California. Standing for Charles E. Diedrich University, Sea-Doo was advertised as a youth-based drug rehabilitation program, much like its spiritual predecessor, Synanon. It is from this school that the troubled teen industry and its various practices would be born. The school itself was situated on top of a mountain, isolated from local towns and with wild animals such as bears, mountain lions, and coyotes in abundance. It was next to impossible for any students to leave the campus without facing the risk of severe bodily harm. The staff and faculty of the school originally consisted of volunteers and other former members of Synanon who had decided to help out with the Wasserman's vision, but eventually even these members would come to be replaced by graduating Sea-Doo students, unpaid ex-drug addicts who were placed in charge of the care and well-being as well as punishment of students. Needless to say, the system was fatally flawed, and over the years, dozens of reports and accusations would come out against the school, with almost nothing being done to stop the abuses nor protect the children who were already housed there. There was very little say or argument when it came to participating in the program. Students were forced into humiliating and even dangerous activities against their will, and refusal guaranteed punishment. According to one student who was only 15 at the time of her enrollment, "When I arrived at Ascent, my first Sea-Doo program, I was instructed to strip and squat. Like most teenage girls, I was taught to say no when something felt wrong, and this felt dangerously inappropriate, so I refused. They told me that we could do this the easy way or the hard way, and I knew that the staff members were more than prepared to force my clothes off of my body. They almost seemed to hope that I would resist. I chose to remove my own clothing as they laughed and mocked me for crying. I was terrified. For the next 6 weeks, I would bathe in a bucket with pink hand soap while the staff watched."
Right here is where I got strip searched by Martin Weens. Had to bend over, pull my cheeks apart, show them everything because they were afraid I was going to smuggle in a knife or candy or something.
I learned very quickly what happened if I resisted the program. We were restrained, physically attacked, forced to wear food tied around our necks, sit on narrow logs in the center of an unshaded perimeter for hours. Your shoelaces were taken if you ran, and we were expected to participate in attack therapy and strenuous work crews until our hands bled and our muscles felt torn. That is, if we wanted to graduate the 6-week program and go home.
And this might have been one of the most feared rooms of all, because this is where, if you were in a lot of trouble, you would go in and they would shut the door and absolutely just come at you with everything they had.
But even that isn't always a guarantee. According to the same student, she was told that rather than going home at the end of her stay, she was instead going to be transferred to the Northwest Academy for further schooling. The school told my family that coming to graduation would disrupt my progress, and I would surely regress. What they did not tell my parents was that a riot had recently occurred at Northwest Academy and several people were placed in the ICU. I arrived at Northwest Academy in September of '97. This riot was not reported to the state until 1998 when the school went under investigation and was closed down due to financial issues thanks to several lawsuits involving allegations of abuse. This was unfortunately a common occurrence among students. Parents would be told by the school to limit their contact so as not to set their child back in their recovery. Students would be instructed not to tell their parents anything in regards to the abuse and punishments they received, and if they attempted to say anything at all, the punishment was quick and oftentimes severe.
Here is the vision office. This is where you would make phone calls to your parents, and you were monitored by either staff or students, depending on your trust level. And if you even for a minute tried to say, "Mom, Dad, please, something's not right here, please," they would immediately hang up the phone. And then a parent counselor would call them the next day and explain that you were really in a bad place and that you needed help, and don't worry about these cry-outs for help, that it's purely normal.
Once you get there, you can't tell them what's going on. If you try and write a letter or talk to them on the phone, the letter's not sent out, the phone call is ended, and if you do manage to get something out to your parents, the school will immediately turn around and explain to them that you're lying and being manipulative to try and get out of there.
So it was very clear that that you had no rights to communicate. You communicating with your parent was a privilege, and that would be revoked if you went outside the boundaries of what was allowed.
The list of abuses among staff and students is incredibly high. Many survivors speak about sexual assaults that were never reported, broken bones caused by staff that went untreated by medical professionals, forced isolation for weeks and sometimes months at a time, and even losing the privilege of having access to regular meals. If this wasn't bad enough, the school's lack of discernment when it came to the adults allowed onto the school led to the disappearance of at least 3 young boys from the Running Spring campus. James Crummell was already a convicted pedophile when he was hired on to work as an assistant to a state-sponsored psychologist, Dr. Burnell Forgey, at the Sea-Doo School in Running Springs, California. The Orange County Register reported that Crummell had made headlines in the late 90s when his neighbors in Newport Beach found out that he was a child molester. However, there's been a long list of crimes against him starting from 1979. At the time of his conviction, Crummell faced execution for the kidnapping, sexual abuse, and murder of 13-year-old James Wilfred Trotter, who disappeared in April 1979 after leaving the Costa Mesa, California hotel room he had shared with his mother. Unfortunately, justice would never come as Crummell committed suicide in his prison cell in 2012. In February of 1998, just a year after Crummell was captured, Dr. Burnell Forgey was arrested after confessing to the sexual assault of a 16-year-old boy with the help of James Crummell. He also confessed to allowing Crummell to have access to his adolescent patient files, as well as leaving the convicted sex offender alone with his young patients. The Sea-Doo School was eventually closed down in 2015 due to multiple lawsuits and allegations of abuse, but its legacy lived on in what is now known as the troubled teen industry. Synanon began as a way to help people, and I don't doubt that Charles Diedrich really wanted to find an alternative treatment for those who weren't able to get help anywhere else. But eventually his vision changed, and from his legacy came an industry that is responsible for the destruction of so many innocent lives. Today, the troubled teen industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry with investors in all levels of government. The average cost of placement in one of these schools ranges anywhere from $1,600 a month to $3,000 a week, depending on the location, and the average mandatory stay is around 6 months, but it has been recorded in some schools as lasting as long as 4 years. Recently, performers like Paris Hilton and Bad Baby have spoken out against the troubled teen industry and formed the hashtag Breakingcodesilence, and that's what brings me to the point of this entire video. In the past year, celebrities and survivors have begun standing up and speaking out against the troubled teen industry and the people profiting off the trauma of generations. Their stories have opened up discussions about mental health, the age of medical consent laws, and the sheer inability for children and young people to defend themselves against abuse, especially when going up against a system that is designed to strip them of their humanity. The problem is ongoing, and despite recent bills being proposed that would raise the age of medical consent and require these schools to stop using things like solitary confinement, forced tube feeding, and stress positions as punishment for even minor infractions, the only thing that's been settled on as of the writing of this video is the Utah government's promise to investigate these issues moving forward and a bill that prohibits the use of pepper spray against students. That's it. Now, I absolutely hate just dumping all this information on people and saying, that's it, now live with it. So I'm not going to do that here because there are ways that you can help. You can find other YouTubers talking about this issue, whether they are victims sharing their stories or other YouTubers trying to bring attention to the issue, and just give them your support. Like and comment on their videos and help to get the word out. I've linked a few videos down below if you'd like to know more about this topic or just simply show your support. You can check out the Breakingcodesilence official website, which I have linked in the comments below for events, petitions, and things you can do to help with the cause. And I've also linked to the official website of the Youth Advocacy League, which is a group of people dedicated to protecting the rights of minors and ensuring that businesses like this cannot function under the radar anymore. People don't tend to change when they're comfortable, when there's money to be made, and when it's cheaper to pay out a lawsuit than it is to hire qualified staff and administration. And when our children's lives aren't worth the cost of a background check, then it's time to stop speaking, and it's time to start screaming.